Some betrayals don't announce themselves with screams or slammed doors. They arrive in silence, hidden behind familiar smiles, wrapped in the warmth of trust you've built over years. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just break your heart, it shatters the very foundation of everything you believed was real. This is the story of how I discovered that the two people I love most in this world had been living a lie right under my nose, and how I made sure they paid for every single moment of deception. My name is Daniel, and for 23 years, I thought I knew what family meant. My father, Richard, was my hero, the man who taught me how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire, how to be a man. My mother, Catherine, was the heart of our home, always there with a warm meal and warmer embrace. They seemed like the perfect couple, still holding hands after decades together, still finishing each other's sentences. I used to tell my friends I wanted a marriage just like theirs someday. God, how naive I was. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had come home early from college, excited to surprise them for Dad's birthday weekend. I had his favorite whiskey in my bag and Mom's recipe for his beloved chocolate cake saved on my phone. The house was quiet when I walked in, eerily so. No television murmuring in the living room, no radio playing in the kitchen, just silence, and then voices. Low, urgent, coming from upstairs. I should have called out, I should have announced myself, but something in the tone of those whispers made me freeze at the bottom of the stairs. My mother's voice, strained and panicked, saying words that made no sense. He can never know, Richard can never find out. And then another voice, male, familiar in a way that sent ice through my veins. We've been careful for 15 years, Catherine. We're not going to slip up now. 15 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. I was 8 years old 15 years ago, still believing in Santa Claus and thinking my parents were invincible. And all that time, my mother had been... I climbed those stairs in a daze, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. Their bedroom door was cracked open just enough to see my mother in the arms of a man who wasn't my father, just enough to recognize him. Robert Mitchell, my father's best friend since college, the man who came to every Christmas dinner, every barbecue, every family milestone. Uncle Rob, I'd called him my entire life. They were planning their next meeting, laughing softly about a close call from last week when Dad almost came home early. Laughing, like my father's trust, like our family, was nothing more than an inconvenience to work around. The woman who had kissed my forehead every night, who had cried at my high school graduation, was casually discussing her decade-and-a-half affair with the man who had taught me how to fish. I didn't confront them, not then. I backed away, silent as a ghost, and walked out of that house feeling like someone had hollowed out my chest and filled it with broken glass. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I made a decision. I wouldn't just expose them. I wouldn't give them the mercy of a quick confession and tearful apologies. No, I would dismantle their comfortable little lie piece by piece, and I would make sure everyone they'd deceived knew exactly who they really were. My father deserved justice, and I was going to deliver it in a way they would never forget. The betrayal was complete. Now, the reckoning would begin. The days following that discovery were the strangest of my life. I moved through the world like an actor playing the role of someone who hadn't just watched his entire reality crumble. I showed up to classes, laughed at friends' jokes, responded to my mother's texts, asking when I'd be home for the weekend. Every word I typed back to her felt like swallowing glass, but I kept my mask firmly in place because I had a plan and it required patience. I started documenting everything. Every time Mom said she was going to yoga class or book club, I was there, parked down the street, camera ready. It didn't take long to establish the pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays, like clockwork, she'd drive to the Riverside Hotel on the edge of town. 20 minutes later, Uncle Rob's silver Mercedes would pull into the same parking lot. They'd even gotten sloppy about it, comfortable in their deception after 15 years of never being caught. The photos were damning, but I needed more. I needed evidence that would be undeniable, that would make it impossible for them to spin some innocent explanation. So I did something I'm not proud of, but I won't apologize for either. I installed monitoring software on Mom's phone during one of her visits to my apartment. Within a week, I had months of text messages, call logs, even voice memos they'd sent each other. Reading those messages was torture. The pet names, the inside jokes, the casual way they discussed my father, like he was an obstacle to manage, rather than a human being they were destroying. Richard's working late again. One text read, "My place, 8 o'clock?" Mom's response was almost immediate. "Can't wait, my love. My love." She called him my love while my father worked overtime at the firm to pay for the house she was betraying him in. But the worst discovery came when I dug deeper into their digital trail. I found emails dating back to the very beginning of their affair, and that's when I learned the truth that made everything so much worse. This hadn't been some passionate mistake that spiraled out of control. They had planned it, discussed it. Robert had been in love with my mother since before she married my father, and she'd known it. They'd made a conscious decision to have their cake and eat it too. Let Dad provide the stability and security while they indulged in their selfish desires behind his back. There were emails discussing close calls, times they'd almost been caught. There was one from 12 years ago where Mom wrote about how guilty she felt lying to poor Richard. But Robert convinced her they deserved happiness too. Deserved, like my father deserved to be made a fool of in his own home by his own wife and best friend. I compiled everything into a folder on my laptop. Photos organized by date, screenshots of messages, email chains printed and highlighted. The evidence was airtight, undeniable. But I still wasn't ready to detonate this bomb because I realized something important. If I went to Dad privately, if I showed him this evidence in the quiet of our home, he might forgive them. He might convince himself it was salvageable, that counseling could fix this. My father was a good man, perhaps too good. His capacity for forgiveness was exactly what they'd been exploiting all these years. No, I needed to make this public. I needed to make sure that when the truth came out, there would be no sweeping it under the rug, no quiet divorce and polite explanations to concerned relatives. I wanted their shame to be as public as their deception had been private. I wanted everyone who had ever sat at our dinner table, everyone who had admired their marriage, everyone who had trusted them, to know exactly what kind of people they really were. So I waited. I planned, and I prepared for the reckoning that would shatter everything. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came in the form of my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. Mom had been planning this celebration for months, a grand party at the country club with everyone who mattered in their lives. Family, friends, colleagues, neighbors. Even the mayor was invited. She wanted it to be perfect, a testament to their enduring love story. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Dad was genuinely excited, talking about renewing their vows during the celebration, about the surprise trip to Paris he'd booked for afterward. He'd been saving for 2 years to make this anniversary special. Watching him plan these romantic gestures for a woman who was sleeping with his best friend every Tuesday and Thursday made my blood boil. But I smiled and nodded and helped him pick out the perfect gift, a diamond necklace that cost more than my car. I told them I'd handle the slideshow presentation, a compilation of photos from their 30 years together. They were thrilled. Mom even cried when I offered, saying I was such a thoughtful son. I wanted to scream at her right then, to ask how she could look me in the eye and lie so effortlessly, but I held it together because I knew what that slideshow was really going to contain. The night of the party arrived. The country club was decorated beautifully, white roses everywhere, string lights creating a magical ambiance, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. Nearly 200 guests filled the ballroom, champagne glasses in hand, ready to celebrate a love story for the ages. Uncle Rob was there too, of course, playing the role of devoted best friend, giving a toast about how Richard was the luckiest man alive to have found Catherine. The applause that followed his words made me sick. Dinner was served, speeches were made. Dad looked happier than I'd seen him in years, holding Mom's hand, kissing her cheek, completely oblivious to the fact that the two people he trusted most had been destroying him for 15 years. Then came the moment I'd been orchestrating for weeks. The lights dimmed for the slideshow presentation. It started innocently enough. Baby photos, wedding pictures, family vacations. The crowd smiled and whispered appreciatively. Mom wiped away tears. Dad squeezed her hand. Then, exactly 3 minutes in, the tone shifted. A photo of Mom's car in the hotel parking lot. Timestamp visible. Then Uncle Rob's Mercedes, pulling in 20 minutes later. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. The next slide was a screenshot of text messages, projected 15 feet high for everyone to see. I need you tonight. Richard's working late again. The response, room 347, my love. I'm already here. The murmurs turned to gasps. I watched from the tech booth as Mom's face went white, as Uncle Rob stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. But I wasn't done. More photos followed, them entering the hotel together, leaving together, kissing in the parking lot. Then came the emails, the ones where they discussed their 15-year deception, where they laughed about close calls, where they planned their next encounters, every dirty secret, every betrayal, every lie projected in crystal clarity for 200 people to witness. Someone tried to stop the presentation, but I'd locked the system remotely. The slideshow continued relentlessly, screenshots of Mom calling Dad, poor Richard, while planning another rendezvous. Photos time-stamped on my 8th birthday, proof their affair had been ongoing since I was a child. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. I watched my father's face crumble as the truth destroyed him in front of everyone he knew. Mom was sobbing, trying to reach him, but he pulled away like she'd burned him. Uncle Rob had already fled, pushing through the stunned crowd. People were crying, shouting, demanding explanations. The perfect anniversary celebration had become a public execution, and I felt absolutely nothing, just cold, calculated satisfaction. They'd built their happiness on lies. Now those lies were ashes, and everyone could see exactly what kind of people they really were. The aftermath was nuclear. The country club erupted into chaos as the final images faded from the screen. Guests stood frozen, champagne glasses forgotten, staring at my mother and the empty chair where Uncle Rob had been sitting moments before. The string quartet had stopped playing. The only sounds were Mom's desperate sobs and the shocked whispers spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. Dad just sat there motionless, staring at the blank screen as if he could will the images to be lies. His face had gone from confusion to comprehension to complete devastation in the span of those terrible minutes. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he finally turned to face my mother. It was like watching someone realize the ground beneath their feet had never been solid at all. Mom tried to approach him, hands outstretched, mascara streaming down her face. "Richard, please, let me explain." But what explanation could possibly suffice? What words could erase 15 years of calculated betrayal? Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked out without a single word. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, no one daring to speak. I emerged from the tech booth and made my way through the stunned guests. People I'd known my entire life looked at me with expressions ranging from pity to horror to something that might have been respect. Mrs. Patterson from next door grabbed my arm as I passed. "Did you know?" she whispered. I met her eyes and nodded once. She released me, understanding settling over her features. Mom saw me then, and the recognition that dawned on her face was almost worth all of it. "You," she breathed, stumbling toward me. "You did this. How could you do this to your own mother?" The audacity of that question, the sheer entitlement of it, solidified every decision I'd made. "How could you do what you did to your husband?" I replied coldly. "To our family, for 15 years. She had no answer, just more tears, more pleading, but I was done. I'd said everything I needed to say through that slideshow. I walked past her, past the wreckage of her perfect party, and went to find my father. I found him in the parking lot, sitting in his car, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I knocked on the window. He looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might drive away. But then he unlocked the door, and I slid into the passenger seat. The same seat I'd occupied countless times over the years for driving lessons, ice cream runs, heart-to-heart talks. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" I told him everything. The day I came home early, what I'd seen, what I'd discovered, how I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, planning this exposure. I expected anger, accusations of going too far. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "I should have seen it," he said finally. "All those years, I should have known." I told him it wasn't his fault, that they'd been careful, that they'd exploited his trust. But he wasn't really listening. He was somewhere else, probably replaying 30 years of marriage, wondering which moments were real and which were lies. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why this way? Why so public?" I took a breath. "Because if I'd told you privately, you would have forgiven her. You would have tried to save it, to keep it quiet, to protect her reputation. She doesn't deserve that protection, Dad. Neither of them do. The whole world watched them build their reputations on lies. The whole world deserves to know the truth." Dad was quiet for another long moment. Then, to my surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't far from it either. "You're absolutely right," he said softly. "Thank you, son." Those two words, that acknowledgement, made everything worth it.